future making component of our methodology. And I'm inspired by Alan Kay, who said that the best way to predict the future is to invent it, or rather make it. For those of you that don't know, Alan Kay is the inventor of Smalltalk GUI at the Xerox Palo Alto Research Center. Now, my first experience on Uber was, so there is no more payment. I just click a button and I arrived wherever I need to go. I felt like I have arrived in the future. It was a pretty good feeling. And every time I go in a Uber or Ola in India, I feel I have arrived in the future. I mean, I'm always tortured by why I didn't come up with Uber, but this futuristic feeling makes this feeling even more exacerbated. Why didn't I come up with this idea? So future making you can think of as an extreme objective. To make the future seems like a tall order. So how do we do that? Now in the workshop, when I ask people what are the barriers to making the future, typical barriers come up. The first one is you can't really predict the future, right? It's generally, future brings the notion of risk. It's uncertain, so that it's scary because we don't know what the risks are going to be. And it also implies that for us to build something futuristic, we need to have deep pockets, big budgets and so on, which are not typically available to us. I noticed that CRM, something that has been around with us from the year 2000, it's still not implemented in companies. Some of them are still with Excel spreadsheets or very old technologies. Cloud came up in the year 2006, AWS. There are companies still discussing whether we should go to the cloud or not. Smartphones, the touch-based smartphones came in 2007. There are people still trying to figure out whether they should use a smartphone or not. Now, I had written an article in the NHRD journal in January 2014. You can read about that. Now, is Uber an old innovation? Now, let's see what Uber did. Smartphones with GPS we were already using. Google Maps to navigate to go from here to there we were already doing. Payment gateways have been there since the e-commerce wave started in 1988, 1999. App stores have been around. Social media has been around. So what exactly did Uber do? Is Uber an old innovation? Right? So that question bothered me. But the problem is Uber seems futuristic already, as I explained. So it can't be old. So what is going on? And I hit pay dirt one day reading William Gibson's work, and he says this brilliantly. The future is already here. It's just not very evenly distributed. He said that in the year 1993. And that was a light bulb moment for me. And I started thinking of examples. And one of the best examples from recent times in the tech world is the self-driving car. Now, self-driving cars have arrived in the US predominantly and in some other parts of the world also. But it is not available everywhere across the world. So that gave me the insight that future is relative and it is not absolute, which is probably the first mistake I was making in terms of coming up futuristic things. So that led me to the insight that probably future is not a one thing. I decided to call it three types of future. The first future that William Gibson talked about is the near future. That is, it's going to come, it's not yet here. Self-driving cars being the best example of that. Now, far future could be something like Hyperloop, which is not yet in production. There are no production installations, but concepts and prototypes exist. So that I would call as the far future. And I found the past future, as I started to call it, the past is even more unevenly distributed, which I call it my corollary to Gibson's observation or Gibson's law. So that is why things like AWS, which has not been rolled out fully even in 2020. And in One Cognizant, the transformation program we did, we rolled out an app store in the year 2010. The iOS app store came in July 2008 and Android app Play Store came within a few months after that. So within a year and a half of that, we had an app store inside an enterprise, probably amongst the first few. So people who are using that would feel like something futuristic has happened. So I felt like past future is an area where there is a maximum opportunity for us to create futuristic innovations. So for us to make the future, first thing we have to do is find the performance under supply and the trim tab, which is something that I discussed in my previous video of the extreme pivot. The next step is to set an extreme objective, and the third one is to connect past future dots, which in this case would be digital dots.
This is a story about rethinking, redoing, and not choosing the easy way out. It's also a story about welcoming an idea, wherever it might have come from. Workplaces today don't look the way they used to. We're moving around, using our laptops wherever we end up. Horte is an LED lamp that goes wherever your laptop does. But the lamp could have turned out differently, if it weren't for the kind of random situations that often bring out the best.
Now at this point you can see what the problem is, right? How can a portable lamp have a plug point? Because that defeats the very idea of a portable lamp. So at this point in the workshop, somebody always in the room says, why not connect it to the USB power, right? Which is already there in the laptop. Let's see what IKEA did.
The best and most defining ideas at IKEA.
We were past that part of the process and had already picked another power plug when a coworker by chance looks by and casually says, "Why aren't you using USB? It's cheaper and more practical."
The idea came from a component engineer who wasn't part of the Horte team.
So we went back to the drawing board and changed it. It was a detail that made all the difference.
And of course the fact that LED bulbs will give off more than 25,000 hours of light. Enjoy your time with Horte, wherever you go.
The trim tab is actually turns out to be the power supply, and the extreme objective is I need to build a lamp which doesn't need a plug point or a direct connection to the wall power, which led us to the USB power as the past future digital dot, and that's how the Horte lamp innovation was created. So now I started to look back in history. Uber is clearly past future digital dots, right? All those smartphone, GPS, Google Maps, they were all past future digital dots that they connected. The first ever ATM, which was rolled out in the year 1967, I talk more about it in the extreme pivot session, but what was the dot James Shepard Barron connected? It was a chocolate vending machine. He thought if I put a coin, chocolate could be delivered. Why not I put a token in and the ATM delivers cash, which is pretty much what the first ATM did. Steve Jobs and the iPhone, the extreme objective, the trim tab was the keyboard, and the extreme objective was to have a phone with no buttons, which led them to the past future dot of touch screens, which clearly they didn't invent. So this has happened in another, I want to give a healthcare example. Before stethoscopes were invented, 150 years or so ago, by Dr. Rene Laennec. Before that, you had to put your ear on the chest, like in the picture that I show. And Dr. Rene Laennec was a shy man, and he had a young woman who he had to consult with, and he was shy and he didn't want to put his ear on her chest to listen to the sound. So in a moment of inspiration, he rolled up a piece of paper and listened to her sounds, and he was able to do it. So, and then because he was a flautist, that he could play the flute, he connected that dot and created the first stethoscope, which is almost looking like a flute. And the rest is history. So if you look at innovations historically as well as in the modern times, they seem to have all done this. Find the trim tab, set an extreme objective, connect a past future dot. So that's what I recommend we do to create the future. Now there's another angle to this in terms of risk. The past future, which I have put in the green color, is the least risk because the risks are well known. They have been in production for a while, so we know what it is. Near future is in yellow because we don't fully know the risks. About a year or so ago, the self-driving car killed the first person, a pedestrian in Nevada. Uber's self-driving car experiment did that. So we don't fully know the risks. So that is risky. Far future is completely unknown territory. We have no idea what risks. If you take Hyperloop, we don't exactly know what risks it poses. So past future digital dots represents the least risk for us to recommend it to our clients, and I think that's why they have the maximum opportunity. With that, I hope you enjoyed this session on future making. We will see you again in 2 weeks.